So when I was out with my friends on Friday, one of them said it could be worse, he could be obsessed with the Foo Fighters. Just a sort of jokey thing implied towards me. But in wanting to follow up on what I said in my last video about wanting to talk about other things, here I am about to talk a whole load about the Foo Fighters. Foo Fighters are my favourite band, so when I was thinking of other things I could talk about, Foo Fighters was one of the easiest options I could start with. I'm going to be offering my opinion on what I think are their worst and best albums. If you have no interest whatsoever in the Foo Fighters, or for some weird reason absolutely despise them, then needless to say this video may not be for you. But if you are interested in them but want a bit of guidance on their albums, then feel free to stick around. And of course, if you're a Foos fan yourself, then I'd love to hear your opinions in the comments below. First up is the album which I think is their worst. For anyone's favourite band, it's always going to be hard to say which one is their worst, and that was true for me as well, because I so wanted to let my Foo Fighters fanboy win over and just say, they're all super amazing! But in reality, there is one in particular which I feel comes up the shortest when stood alongside their other albums, and that's 2007's Echo, Science, Patience and Grace. This is an odd one for me because it's a good album. If this was a band's first album, I'd think, hey, this band is pretty good. But this wasn't a new band. This was a band that had been around for 13 years already, and so there was a lot to compare it to. And when you do compare it to their previous albums, it sounds different. It sounds very smoothly produced, very polished. Of course, that's not always a bad thing, but Foo Fighters always had a raw sound unless they were doing a slower or more chilled out song. That rawness, in my mind, is critical to the Foo Fighters. Sure, the other albums have slower songs too, but they always had at least one or two typical Foo Fighters rock songs which carried that rawness. But on Echoes, everything just feels way too perfect and produced, and it takes away that raw sound even if they're trying to bring it in. You can certainly tell it's the Foo Fighters, but they're cleaned up way too much. In all, it was a good album and a great effort from them, but when even the main heavy track sounds too polished, you know something is amiss. If someone came up to me and said they were going to start listening to the Foo Fighters and they were thinking of starting with Echo, Science, Patience and Grace, I'd tell them to start elsewhere. Instead, I'd tell them to start with what in my mind is their best album, the one which encapsulates the Foo Fighters best. Normally picking an album which you think is a band's best album is just as hard as picking the one which you think is their worst. But I actually found this one the easiest to decide on. Funny enough, it's the album which came 10 years before Echo, Science, Patience and Grace. Their second album, The Colour and the Shape. This was easy for me because Colour and the Shape in my mind contains what are three of their most iconic songs. Monkey Wrench, My Hero and of course Everlong. Everlong closes pretty much every single Foo Fighters concert, so knowing where that amazing song comes from is a must for anyone new to Foo Fighters. Colour and the Shape I also think manages to get the best balance between a raw and a polished sound. It contains the raw and heavy Monkey Wrench and enough space, yet overall it sounds really good. While Colour and the Shape is commonly praised just for having the likes of Everlong, My Hero and Monkey Wrench on there like I just did, I should point out that the other songs on there are good as well. It's a really good album and most tracks are worth a listen. Hey Johnny Park is a really awesome song and I was really surprised and happy to see that they played it at Reading last summer. However, there are a couple of weak links on there, namely the quite boring Walking After You and fairly cheesy See You. But besides those, there isn't really anywhere that I can fault it. The Colour and the Shape is a very good album. It's probably their best, and is definitely the one that I'd recommend to new listeners to the Foo Fighters. So there you go, those are my opinions on what I think is the worst and best Foo Fighters album. If you enjoyed this video, then clicking like would be great, and if you're feeling even more generous, then why not subscribe? And if you've got something to say, then just drop it in the comments and I'll get round to replying to it. So I'm gonna go now and probably lie down and not talk about the Foo Fighters. Bye.